You're listening to the Sisters in Loss podcast, a faith-based grief and loss podcast for Black women, where you will hear stories of miscarriage, infant loss, stillbirth, and infertility to learn there is a testimony in tragedy. You will learn how to heal, gain clarity, find hope and peace, and turn your pain into your purpose after loss. I'm your host, Erica M. McAfee. Hey, Sisters in Loss. Welcome to the first episode under the new podcast name. It was time and fitting to change the name of the podcast to match my other branding ventures, as well as my new venture, Sisters in Loss LLC, which is my coaching and empowerment company. As you may know, we're hosting our first event, our brunch, our Sisters in Loss brunch on Saturday, April 21st, 2018, and it's almost sold out. Have you purchased your ticket yet? If not, go to sistersinloss.com for more information. Welcome to episode 38 of the Sisters in Loss podcast. In today's episode, we have Rana Campbell, host of Dreams in Drive podcast, who shares her miscarriage story and the cost of miscarriage from her feature on Elle.com. After her miscarriage in 2016, Rana found the hospital bills quickly adding up to the thousands of dollars, even with insurance. Rana Campbell is a marketing strategist, content creator, and host of the Dreams and Drive podcast, a podcast she launched in January 2016 that teaches creatives and lifestyle entrepreneurs how to take their dreams out of park and put them into drive. In this episode, Rana takes us back on how she started Dreams and Drive podcast while grieving the loss of her baby, and how her feature on Elle.com helped shed light on the financial burden of losing a child. Here is Rana Campbell. Well, thank you, Rana, for being on the podcast.
Thank you, Erica. I'm so excited to get to join you on today's show.
So, for those who do not know you, can you share a little bit about yourself and what you do?
So my name is Rana Campbell, and I'm the host of Dreams and Drive, which is a podcast for creatives and lifestyle entrepreneurs who, want to learn how to take their dreams out of park and into drive. And I've been doing it for the past 2 years. I've been growing it. I started from scratch. I was a blogger. I call myself like a wannabe blogger before this. I was doing a lot of freelance writing for sites like MadameNoire, Huffington Post, all this other stuff. And I realized that while I loved interviewing people and writing their interviews out, I thought that the medium of audio and storytelling and podcasting would be really where I would walk in my purpose. And I'm just happy that I took the leap and tried it out. And, now I've grown an audience that's really, grown and engaged every day. And beyond the podcast, I also am a marketer by day. So I like to say I do marketing by day and podcasting by night, but podcasting is really my dream, and I hope to build a media network from Dreams and Drive. So yeah, that's a little bit about me and what I do.
Awesome. So thank you for sharing that. But what people may not know about you is that you had a loss. So tell us about your loss story and that journey.
Yeah, so it's funny because you're the first person that I'm talking to about this outside of Elle. So recently I did a video with Elle magazine where they talked about, where the focus of the video was the cost of being a woman in miscarriage. And I had been holding this part of my story in for a while. I just didn't know how to talk about it, and I hadn't really saw other people talking about it in the space that I was. So I guess where I can start is I had a miscarriage in May 2016 when it was 5 months into my podcast. It was, the pregnancy in the beginning, I think I found out late April. It was not planned. Me and my boyfriend, we weren't planning it. It was totally unplanned. And I was just really scared. I didn't know what I was going to do, but I did know that I was going to keep it. And the first, I remember the day that I found out, it was actually funny because my friend was a nurse's assistant and she brought home a bunch of tests, and she read the test wrong. So the first test, it was oh, you're not pregnant. And I had this huge relief in one sense. And then when she's like, oh, wait, we have to do it again. You are pregnant. And I'm like, what? What kind of nurse's assistant are you, right? Mm-hmm. And so from that moment on, I just really had this whole different mindset shift. I think I was just really scared at that point because I hadn't planned for it, and I didn't necessarily know. I think the biggest thing in my head at that point was like, what will other people think about me?
Mm-hmm.
And thinking back at that moment, I really wish I hadn't felt like that. But I'm just being honest. Like, I just was so nervous. You know, I come from a Caribbean background. I wasn't married. You know, I was still living at home with my parents. I mean, I was 20. How old was I? 24. I was 24 at the time, so technically, you know, I was a woman. I wasn't like a teenager anymore. I graduated from college. I had a job. I had benefits. But there was just still this underlying fear, but we just decided that we were going to keep it. And in my head, it was like, all right, Rana, like, figure it out. Like, you can do this. And as the weeks went on, I started to, like, develop a bond with the baby. We went to the first doctor's visit, and we heard the heartbeat. But there was something at that point that kind of alarmed me. She just was like, the baby was measuring small, and she was just making sure that I had my dates correct. And I was like, yeah, I do have my dates correct. I know, like, you know, I'm very peculiar when it comes to my periods. So I knew all my dates were right. And I didn't think anything of it. We were, like, trying to figure out plans of, like, you know, where would we move in together? Like, what were we going to do? And around the 8th week, I started spotting. And I had, like, one of my best friends has a son. I had family members, I had coworkers who were pregnant before, and I remember one of my coworkers telling me that when she had a miscarriage, she started spotting. So I got spotting, and I was really, really scared. And I didn't know what to do. I called the doctor, and they were just like, oh, you know, that's normal in the beginning. If you're, like, soaking through a pad an hour, then, you know, that's when you should call us. But it wasn't like that. It was just normal spotting. So I said, okay. And there was just this feeling in the back of my head that something wasn't right. But, you know, when you just have, like, a hope that it's not, that feeling isn't what's going to, like, what am I saying? Do you get what I'm saying, Erica? Like, you know, you have that feeling, like, okay, don't even think that. I was on babycenter.com, like, researching every question anyone has ever asked about spotting, and this was around on Mother's Day 2016. I remember being at my grandmother's house, and we were all there, and I hadn't told anyone in my family yet. Like, I had just told my close friends, and I remember being at my grandma's house and just being in this undescribable pain, like, just sitting at the table, like, they were all drinking champagne and wondering why I wasn't drinking anything, and I'm just like, oh, I don't feel good, and I just had this really weird pain in my abdomen, and my grandma kept looking at me with this, like, knowing look, but she didn't say anything. It was a really, like, weird moment. And the next day, we decided that I would go to the doctor. But in my head, I still was just like, oh, everything's fine. It's just, like, this is what happened. He went by myself because I thought everything would be okay. And I remember going to the doctor. And by this time, I started to bleed a lot more. And going to the doctor, and they rushed me in. They did an ultrasound, or they did a vaginal ultrasound. And he, like, told me that there was no more heart, and that baby wasn't alive anymore. And I just think that was just, like, I've never felt, like, the feeling I felt at that moment was just, how to describe it, it just was the worst feeling I've ever felt up until that point. So I, like, you know, being that I was by myself, mind you, like, I hadn't told anyone, so I was just like, this is a horrible, like, time to, like, tell my parents, you know, because he works in New York, so I was just like, oh my gosh, I'm here in New Jersey by myself, we didn't know what to do, and I was calling him, and he just was, like, so in shock himself, so we decided that we would call his mother, because the options for me was I could either let it pass naturally, or I could do a D&C, and at that point, I didn't know when it would happen where I would pass naturally, so I just said, okay, I'll just do a D&C, and they were like, did you eat today? No, they said, okay, we can do it today if you want, but I needed someone to drive me there, because I couldn't, like, drive home by myself, so we ended up telling his mother, and I ended up driving home to her house. She drove me back to the surgical center, and I had a D&C, and yeah, it was just over so quickly. And, you know, it's weird going from having this idea of accepting something and then it just disappearing so quickly.
Right. What obstacles have you overcome? How did the miscarriage impact you individually? And then how did it impact your relationship?
I felt it was a secret burden, not burden. I felt like it was the secret pain that I was carrying inside that I couldn't talk about to anyone. Like, I remember, it was so funny because for the first, like, 5 weeks, I was so nervous. I was, like, freaking out. I felt like I stressed it away. I know they say you shouldn't think like that, but I just felt like I was just so stressed out. I couldn't really enjoy being pregnant because I was just thinking so much about what everyone else thought, and I just kept saying, can I do this? Like, I had these crazy habits. Like, I don't know why I started. I mean, I'm pretty fit now, but me and my best friend, I'm like, girl, I gotta go to the park and work out. Like, I just had these weird habits that I picked up thinking that it would help me, like, keep my mind off of things. So individually, I just felt like after it happened, there was just this empty feeling inside of me and just this pain that I wasn't talking about. And it was weird that I had my podcast. So I'm the type of person when I'm in any type of, like, traumatic moment or when I'm sad, I need to channel that energy into something else. So I felt like I just started really focusing all my efforts, all my energies into my podcast because it became my baby in a way. And it was also hard for me because at the end of my pregnancy, actually 3 days before, she told me she was pregnant. And she's, like, one of my best friend cousins. She's, like, my real cousin. We're also, like, best friends. And so at that moment, I felt so much of a relief because I felt, wow, I won't have to do this alone.
Right.
I have, like, my best friend with me, my family, she'll support me. So her pregnancy lasted. And then, like, a month later, my best friend, like, from high school was pregnant with her second child. And she didn't want to tell me because she just didn't know how I would take it. So she ended up telling me, like, when she was, like, 15 weeks. I'm like, girl, you're looking a little round. What's happening?
Right.
So it was hard. Although I was very supportive of both of them, I just still couldn't shake the fact that, wow, like, all three of our children were supposed to be, born around the time. It also was tougher for Andrew because, like, the baby was supposed to be born, like, his birthday. And it was just, like, in our relationship, I felt like we both just kept trying to be strong for each other, but we didn't necessarily, like, talk about our feelings so much. It was just, oh my gosh, okay, now what? Let's not talk about it. Okay, I'm sad. Like, we didn't really, like, I know this probably sounds weird, but, like, we acknowledged it, but it was something that we didn't really talk about, like, on the daily. But because I hadn't told my family, I told my best friend, he became the person that, like, when I had those, like, I broke down, I could only go to him because nobody else really knew.
So kudos to Elle for featuring women like yourself in a mainstream platform to talk about miscarriage. So what was your encouragement or your motivation for actually putting yourself out there on a national platform like that?
You know what? Because I kept thinking to myself, like, one of the things with Dreams and Drives, I interview a lot of people. They're sharing their stories. They're being so raw, so emotional about moments of triumph that they've had to go through in their own stories. And I kept feeling like a part of my story I was not being truthful to my audience about. But not that I wasn't being truthful. I just wasn't really revealing a real part, like a part of my life that could have, but it didn't because I was able to push through it, but it still pains me. You know what I mean?
Right.
And I just kept thinking, like, I want to talk about it. I want to talk about it, but I'm so nervous. I don't know what people will think about it. And I realized it wasn't only my story to tell. Like, I didn't want to, like, he didn't necessarily talk about it in such a public platform. So I was respectful of that as well. But I just had this gnawing feeling that there's so many other people out there who are going through things like this. And I remember one of my guests was on the show, and she's a very emotional part of her own journey. And we had a whole discussion where she told me about her own miscarriage that she had, and she told me that she never told anyone about that before. But I never, at that point, was ready to share my story. But then I felt kind of guilty about it because it's not that she didn't want me to. I just want something that happens to a lot of women. But I just felt really nervous, really shameful about it. And this was such a stroke of luck, Erica. It was such a stroke of luck. And just, like, I believe in signs. And I don't know if it was, like, God telling me you should do this. Here is your platform to do it. But I'm subscribed to a network called Help a Reporter Out. Have you heard of that before?
No, I haven't.
Well, it's basically like this program. It's not a program, an email list, basically. It's called Harrow, Help a Reporter Out. You can sign up for it, and you'll get notifications. There's different types of, like, lists. They come out, like, in the afternoon and the night, and basically it's like it's kind of like a directory of reporters who are looking for sources for their stories.
Oh, okay.
So I'm on the list, and I normally emails, I just delete them. But for some reason this day in October, I said, Rana, open this Help a Reporter Out email. And I opened it, and I was just scrolling through, like, the lifestyle section, and it said, I'm looking for women to talk about their miscarriage stories. And something just told me to reply to the query, and I replied and said, hey, I would love to learn more about this. And then the woman responded to me and said, hey, we're from L. We're looking for women to share their miscarriage stories. Would you be interested in me connecting with a reporter? And I said, okay. And that's how it all started. Like, if I hadn't read that email, I wouldn't have had this whole experience since then. And I spoke to the reporter, and she told me how she wanted to focus they were doing something on the cost of being a woman, and how comes to miscarriages, one of the things that people don't often talk about is the actual financial side of it.
Right.
And for me personally, that really resonated with me, because that has been my biggest, like, outside of the personal struggle, the financial side of it and the whole insurance thing and everything, that it just has been a nightmare for me.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's part of my that I really felt like I could speak to. And I was so nervous about it. And I told her I would get back to her. And something just told me, Rana, do it. Like, stop. You spent so long when you were pregnant, you were worried about what people would think about you. Afterwards, when you wanted to talk to people, you were worried about what people would think about you. Like, this is a sign I'm going to help a lot of other women who have, who are or have been dealing with these issues. So I said yes. They came out to my house. We did an interview, and the final video went out in December. And I think to date, like, it probably has like over 365,000 views right now.
Wow.
It's really, really well pieced, to showing how, first of all, miscarriage is never talked about within our community, especially. And also just there's a whole other component, like the financial burden that it can also cause in women as well. So that's what really, I think I was just tired of not talking about it, and tired of carrying around this shame, and just realized, like, I'm an adult, I'm a woman. There are so many people who are out here struggling with this. And as I found out, following this, so many people, like people in my own life who were very close to me, came out and said that, hey, I've had a miscarriage, or, I've had this happen to me. And I was just so amazed, like, the things that we hold inside.
Right.
And little do we know, just by sharing it, how much relief and how much we could help somebody else.
Today's episode is brought to you by sistersinloss.com. We are holding a Sisters in Loss brunch on April 21st, 2018 in Chesapeake, Virginia. The Sisters in Loss community is a community of Christian Black women who have experienced the loss due to a miscarriage, infant or child loss, pregnancy loss, stillbirth, or infertility. Our mission is to tackle the difficult questions around grief, loss, marriage, love, and self-care while on the journey of healing through the Word of God, gaining clarity and peace by the power of testimonies, and in finding an empowering path forward after loss. This year's theme is From Surviving to Thriving. The brunch is kicking off National Infertility Awareness Week, which is April 22nd through 28th, 2018. Our goal is to provide the women in attendance there a support community for their grief journey, hope after loss, and to go from surviving to thriving after loss. For more information on the Sisters in Loss brunch, visit sistersinloss.com. So, I was saying that's the reason why I started this podcast, is because I wanted to share stories of Black women who have experienced loss, because it's so taboo in our community to talk about stuff like this. So many people hold it in for years and years and years. And like you, if I didn't have had a miscarriage or had an infant loss, I wouldn't have known my husband's grandmother had one, or, my grandmother had one. They would have never told me.
I know, and it's just like, it's not something that they talk about, right? And I think for me, too, one of the biggest things that I also realized is just this whole idea of motherhood and when is the right time to be a mother. That was something that really, like, I was struggling with, because I grew up in a very Caribbean household, and my mom was always like, don't have sex before marriage and all this other stuff. And it was just very strict, and we never talked about it, right? Mm-hmm. That was just never talked about in my house. And I just felt this whole, I felt like, I was young, older, people wouldn't look at me differently. And it was just there were a lot of things I realized that I had to work on for myself, because I don't think any woman, if they're in this predicament, should be thinking about that type of stuff, right? And I don't feel like I was excited until towards the end, because I was just so nervous and so scared of judgment. you know? Like, I had to hold that excitement inside. And I wish I hadn't had to feel like that.
Right, exactly. And I understand that. After your miscarriage, did you look for any resources out there to help you throughout your grief journey, just being able to deal with your grief?
No, I didn't even, I read like art online. I think I just Googled random things, but I didn't necessarily look for any resources. One thing I do remember is one of my cousins had a friend who had an infant loss, and at a hospital they had like a support group for women who either had miscarriages or others of infant loss, and she told me, maybe you should look into going. And I never did. I don't know why. I don't know if I just felt like intimidated or if I felt like it would just make me, at that point, because I think it was like a year later when she told me, I had just really had been able to control my feelings. I thought that going to a support group after that amount of time would have made me, like, old memories come up that I didn't want to feel. So I think I just shied away from it. So I think my resource was like, I would write. Every time I felt something, I had this poem on my computer called One Long Poem, and I would write in it every time I had feelings that I wanted to get out.
Yeah, so
I didn't really know that there were like actual resources beyond that.
Right. I pray that the loss community does a better job for those moms who have miscarriages, and the OBGYNs in their offices actually have something physically there that they can take and know what to do and provide those resources to them. Because it's different when you have an infant loss. They normally have something that they can, like a memory box or whatever, but we need to cater to those women who have miscarriages, because it's the same loss. A loss is a loss no matter what stage of pregnancy you're in.
That's something that I think I felt guilty about in the beginning. It's like, oh, well, it wasn't that far along. I shouldn't be feeling like this, right? And then reading stories of other men, less than me, and they still have these feelings. I'm like, oh, wait, Rana, you don't have to feel like this. You don't have to diminish, what this meant to you. And that's something that took me a while to really be okay with, because I kept trying to tell myself, like, it's not that bad, right? But it really, and I think me doing that made it even worse for me. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm. Yep, exactly.
It made it like, I kept trying to tell myself, okay, you weren't that far along. It's all right. And I kept running from the fact that it was something that I'll carry for the rest of my life.
What encouraging words can you give to the mom out there who's had a miscarriage and is still on the fence about sharing their story?
I say this, I found this with like my podcast. There's so much power in telling your story. Like when I started coming out to even like some of my close friends about, what had happened to me and my story, I started finding out people who I was close with for years had stories similar to mine, and they felt like they couldn't talk to anyone. And I think sometimes we create scenarios that happen before they even do. Mm-hmm. And I realized that by me holding it in, I just automatically assumed that I wouldn't be accepted. People would write off my story, not knowing that there's so many others out there who need to hear it, who need to feel like they're not alone. Because as the statistics say, like one in four pregnancies end in loss. And it's just something that I just want to encourage anybody who's struggling with this, who's listening in, like there are other women who have gone through the same thing who can support you, and just know that the feelings that you're feeling, it's okay to feel it. And like, don't ever try to downplay the impact that it's had on your life. Because I know for me, it just made me so aware of, like, I could write just things leading up to it, like the doctor, the OBGYN. Like, I remember going in the first day, Erica, like when we heard the ultrasound, and she saw that I was so nervous. And just thinking about it now, I'm not saying it was her job, but it made me realize, like, if I'm ever pregnant again, I may want to get, like, a doula or a midwife, like someone who's a little bit more centered on the woman's health. Because I was literally crying in the doctor's office. Not even, like, out of fear. I was just so nervous. Right. And she told me to go to babycenter.com. And I was just like, there are people, when people have STDs, you give them pamphlets. Like, why is it that you couldn't just, like, see that I'm, like, just genuinely nervous? And there was just no compassion. Babycenter.com, you're the doctor. Like, you should at least direct me to some type of resource that can help me. And it also just makes me think about, I think as, like, our culture shifts, because back in the day, people were parents a lot younger, right?
They were.
And now it's like this whole thing, like with the working woman.
Mm-hmm.
And this is something I see within my circle a lot. Like, as a young entrepreneur, millennial,
Mm-hmm.
have these conversations about motherhood. I don't really see it happening in my circle at all. Like, it's always just about career, right?
Right.
I mean, maybe get a husband, but it's not necessarily like, what does motherhood mean in our society? What does it mean to you? I think, at least in my circle, sometimes it's like, keep those, like, wanting to be a mother one day thoughts to yourself until you've reached this point in your life.
Right.
I think a lot of times for me in my circle, it's been, kids will be the detriment to your life. You won't be able to do this. Like, live your life before you ever have kids. So I had all these conflicting notions so that when it happened to me, I didn't know how to process everything because I was just thinking about what I had heard would happen when you become a mother.
Right.
And even like my own mom, like I don't blame her for this, but I think just because she wanted me to like reach her idea of what success was before I entered into becoming a mother, that's why I was so nervous to tell her, because I didn't want to disappoint her. I just wish that these conversations were one that we had more of, because I know a lot of other women who want to talk about it, but just don't feel like they have the circles to talk about it.
Right.
And I often feel for them too, because I feel like it's even harder for them. Like, you don't hear guys talking about miscarriage.
Nope.
But it is their child too. Like it's their child too. And that's something too that it's like already with Black men, it's like they get so, it's like sharing their emotional pain is not even something that's promoted. So this is just something that's even so traumatic. It can be very traumatic to them as well. And it's just like there's no space for them as well to talk about these things.
We need to open that space up to Black men as well to be more open about their feelings and about miscarriage and pregnancy loss. And I hope to add some more men to the episodes in the near future, because I think having their perspective on it is powerful as well.
The one thing that I'm struggling with now, though, is I think I have this fear of, like, being pregnant again. And it's something that I've seen in other people's stories. It's like, if I'm ever pregnant again, will I ever enjoy it?
Right.
Because you always have this fear in the back of your head. And it's something I was talking about with one of my close friends who had an ectopic pregnancy. It was a really big ordeal for her, because they didn't really talking about how she's just fearful that she'll never really get to be, like, have that feeling of just fear. Like, just this peace. Because when you lose, that's just something people don't realize. Like, when you lose something, when it's in your body, you feel like you're supposed to protect, right?
Right, exactly.
This child growing inside of you, and your body fails you. It's just something that's like, it's hard to, like, get past. And some people, they try again and they have a rainbow baby. But I think some people just, like, are just scared to ever try again. And it's just something that I hope that, when I do come to that point where I either want to have a child, or if I plan for it, that hopefully it's not as, like, I'm not as scared. And those feelings I'm able to work through better when the time comes.
Amen. I agree. It is definitely a traumatic experience to go through a pregnancy after a loss. But like you said, there's so many different coaches out there. You can get you a doula and someone else to help support you and to ask those questions for you, so that you won't feel like you're in it alone. And plus, typically once you get past the mark of where your miscarriage is, you feel a little bit better, but you're still on edge the whole pregnancy. It's a hard pregnancy, trust me. But once you get through it, you're like, okay, I'm good.
Yeah. So, that's what I'm hoping for. I'm looking forward to, one day. And I just think, sometimes things happen for a reason. There's just so much that I learned about myself through this experience. And there's just so much I learned about what I'm capable of accomplishing. Although, I experienced loss, although I experienced pain, I was able to, like, in my own way, like, keep, like, I say this, like, my podcast became my baby, but I was really able to grow something. And for me, like, I'm just happy that I was able to find something that I was able to help people through. Because me doing the podcast, I don't know, like, because I didn't talk, like, I always say to people, like, you never know how you're inspiring someone. You never know how you're motivating someone. And just getting that support every week from my listeners really helped keep going during a time when I just felt like given up, and I had something to keep pushing me and to keep going. So I just want to say thank you to anyone who during that time helped me and didn't even know they were helping me.
Yes, and thank you so much for sharing your story and being willing to be on the podcast. So where can we find you on social?
Oh yeah, so if you want to check out the podcast, we are Dreams and Drive across Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. If you want to check out my personal page, I definitely should change the screen name since I was in high school. But it's Rain, RAIN, Shine, Love, LUV. And it's funny because like one of my mottos when I was younger was, there's three things in this world, like sunshine, rain, and dreams. So that's where I got the whole Rain, Shine, Love from, So yes, you can find me there. And then we're dreamsanddrive.com. If you want to listen to the podcast, and we're on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Play, SoundCloud, wherever you listen to audio.
Awesome. Well, thank you again, Rana, for being on the podcast.
Thank you, Erica.
Thank you for listening to today's episode. I pray the show was inspirational and a blessing to you. The show notes and links for today's podcast can be found on ericaandmcafee.com/podcast. Please join us offline in our private Facebook group at sistersinloss.com. Please rate and leave a 5-star review of the show in Apple Podcasts or where you listen to podcasts. Keep the faith, and I'll talk to you next Wednesday.